Revision of London by William Blake. This poem was written in 1792, just over 50 years before Christmas Carol was written. And actually, the lot of the context that applies to that is similar here. The Industrial Revolution was taking over Britain. People were forced to move from the countryside to the cities to work in the factories, where conditions were very, very harsh. They had to work very long hours in dangerous jobs, and people had no help if they couldn't work, if they were too poor. So William Blake, he's looked around him on the streets of London, and he was angry. He was angry that the rich, the church, the monarchy, that they showed no help to the poor, that they exploited the poor, and he felt this was wrong. His message is that we're all equal and that actually the most vulnerable in society should be looked after. Now, the message links quite strongly to the structure of the poem. The structure of the poem is such that it's very rigid. There's 4 stanzas. There's 4 lines per stanza. There is a rhyme scheme. It goes A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, and onwards. And this rhyme structure being so rigid, it could reflect the lives of the poor, their boring lives that were the same, they were routined, day in, day out. It could reflect the machines within the factories, those steam engines that would constantly pump and keep the workers at work. It could be reflective of that. There's repetition within this poem. In the first 2 lines, we see the word chartered being used twice. Charter, that was a piece of paper. It signified that someone owned something. So it was significant that the rich people owned everything. They owned the streets. Blake even points out that they own the Thames, the river. It's a piece of nature, yet it was owned by the rich. He repeats the word mark, and we'll talk about that in a moment. He repeats the word every 5 times, and this really emphasises that this suffering that he saw was everywhere. No one could escape it. It was widespread. And the suffering, again, is represented by his repetition of the word cry. We cry because we're frustrated, because we're in pain, because we're angry, because we're sad. It has such negative connotations. So Blake was emphasising that when he looked around him, people were in pain, they were suffering. The first quote that I've highlighted is marks of weakness, marks of woe. That word mark, I've drawn a face with a mark on it, a scar. A mark is permanent. And when we get a scar, it's often because something violent or painful has happened to us. So again, he's emphasising that these poor people, they are damaged by their lives, and they're damaged forever. It's permanent. There is no escape from it. And it is painful, their lives that they have to suffer. The next quote here, the mind-forged manacles. I've drawn some manacles. They're chains that would be used to hold prisoners or slaves captive. In this metaphor, what Blake is saying is that these manacles are within people's minds. He's saying that they are trapped, that they are conditioned and brainwashed to accept the lives they live. And they have forged, like a blacksmith forges metal, knocks it into shape. These people have developed these manacles themselves, and that's a very sinister metaphor to present us with. People do not question the lives that they've been given. They do not try to fight back. But there may be some hope, because if something is forged by a blacksmith, it can be reheated, it can be knocked into a new shape. So perhaps there's some hope from Blake that people will be able to forge a new way of thinking. Blake really highlights that it's the most vulnerable in society that are being exploited. We have infants, we have chimney sweepers forced to do dangerous work, sold by their parents. We have soldiers who have to risk their lives for the monarchy. And we have harlots, prostitutes, forced to use their bodies to make money. The most exploited job that you could do. Blake talks about blood running down palace walls. Perhaps he is alluding to 3 years previous, the French Revolution, where the working class people, the poor, they rose up. They got rid of their monarchy. They fought back. And he may be suggesting he wants the people of London to do the same. But he ends with really quite a negative image. He talks with plosives. This this blights with plagues. The plague was a feared and deadly disease. It killed thousands. What he's saying is that the marriage hearse, this oxymoron, a marriage, here's our bride, it's a new beginning, it's a happy celebration. But he has combined it with a hearse, a vehicle that carries a coffin. There's death. And Blake seems to be showing little hope at this end of the poem, where he talks about a happy beginning being marred with death and darkness. It seems that he sees little hope, even in happy occasions. This poem could be compared to several of the poems in the collection. Ozymandias, where we see a tyrant ruling his people. My Last Duchess, where we see an upper-class duke able to do as he wishes with his wife, to his wife, and there be no repercussions. Storm on the Island, where the British government have taken power in Northern Ireland and people feel they're oppressed. A lot of the war poems, where soldiers are sent to dangerous and deadly situations, where propaganda has convinced them that they are going to be protected. To Checking Out My History, where we see a man growing up in the Caribbean who is only taught white history, who feels oppressed by the British people who hold power. And this poem is important today, still in our society, where we have the upper classes and people who are privately educated still getting on in life better than the working class. If you look at statistics, 75% of leading judges were privately educated. 62% of senior armed forces officers were privately educated. A third of politicians, 43% of newspaper columnists. There is still an argument that today we don't have an equal society. So this poem, although written a long time ago, is still important and resonates in our society today. I hope this was helpful, and that's the London Revision.